So, Michelle, call me crazy, but I don't want tech companies selling me pizza. I want pizza companies selling me pizza. And I feel like more companies are now positioning themselves as a tech company instead of whatever that they are doing at their core. So I feel like because distribution channels are so easy to plug yourselves into, everybody's now focusing more on distribution rather than the actual product that they're making. So we're finding ourselves in just sea of mediocre pizzas. Kind of how do you think ultimately the CEO should think about product versus distribution when it comes to technology and potentially brand leaders?
Okay, first, Domino's is good pizza. I think it all goes hand in hand. I mean, if you look at branding, it's not an idea on its own. If you don't have the product and you're not able to deliver that in a seamless way, your brand is going to fall flat. And I think what digital has done is it's allowed people to understand all of those different lenses. If there's something broken with your product, you know what it is, and hopefully it's easier to fix. And if there's something broken with your service or your distribution, you know what it is, and hopefully it's easy to fix. And I think that's sort of the magic formula. And unfortunately, if your product sucks or if your distribution sucks, there's so many other people out there that can do that easier. And so, I focus a lot on brand because I'm a brand strategist, but ultimately brand is always going to fall flat if you don't do those things right. And so, we're all marketers here and we're talking a lot about marketing. But I think what Domino's has done really well is they've introduced transparency across all aspects, whether that's their marketing, their distribution, their product. You can see when your pizza is being made and when it's going to come to your house. And I think it's genius. And I think if you're not leveraging tech across all of those different lenses, I don't care how good your big idea is, it's going to fall flat.
And ultimately, I feel it kind of feeds into what Andrea was saying, that ultimately, arguably even, success long-term of a business comes down to high retention of customers. So if you're able to understand where exactly, for example, you have fallen short, and you have a strong understanding of identity of these customers, then you can potentially improve on your product or personalization of these products.
Yeah, I can add to that. You may want to take FCB6 off the screen. As much as I love the promotion of my company for the next 40 minutes of the day, I wasn't sure if there was a next slide. We're good? We're good here? Okay, perfect. I did not pay for that. Listen, I think, I totally lost my train of thought in making that hilarious joke.
Retention?
Just now.
Customer identity?
Why you don't drink wine when you sit
You had a great point about utility,
on
I
a
think.
panel. Which was my point about utility?
I mean, digital lets you solve problems.
So Andrea, you were saying, you looked at FCB and you started saying that ultimately, and correct me if I'm wrong, what FCB is focusing on.
It came back. There it is. Thanks, guys. Thanks for your support. Raise your hand if you've not received a brief in the last 10 years that says, make a frictionless experience or make this easy. Exactly. We have actually made a race to the bottom. We have formulaically made consumers slippery. And we've made the experience more and more and more and more frictionless. So I totally agree. If we are not doing a good job, they're like, see you later, alligator. There's another pizza down the street. I think that is what's happened. We have consumers who have access to information at their fingertips. I have twin 16-year-olds, believe it or not. I know I look too young. Twin 16-year-olds, and they don't, they just, everything's at their fingertips all the time. They consume nothing. They judge in a moment and they move on to the next thing. And so if you're not constantly meeting their expectations, they have zero investment in that. And Jay's gonna now jump in and talk to you about why we need to then work on brand to increase longer-term value. Am I right?
Well, I don't know. I'll take a contrarian view and just say I don't buy a pizza company being in the technology business. Because if they're going to be in the technology business, they better be able to compete with Apple, Microsoft, IBM, whoever. I think it's bullshit. I don't think, I think they're in the business of, making pizzas. I think that they need to stay in a lane that's maybe a little bit wider for them and discover what's at the core of why people bought the pizza in the first place. So I don't know that I buy this notion of we're in the technology business. because that is not your core product. That's not the reason you exist. It's not what people want you for. So I don't know that there's any longevity to it beyond rallying maybe your shareholders and possibly internal staff. And it's a nice thing to say right now at this moment. That would be my thought on it.
I'm just happy we talked about pizza for 10 minutes.
More pizza. So my second question was to Jay. So you started saying that, kind of alluding to measurement of the return on investment of creativity. And obviously, if you go to your CFO or CRO and you have very tangible data to show which distribution channel is working better than other, you can optimize it down to the perfect targeting strategy or optimization strategy. With creativity, it's guesswork, right?
Yeah.
Like you said, people are slow, dumb, unpredictable. How can you convince your CFO to write a check for something that may not work next quarter?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a problem, and I think that's why we've all kind of clung to the measurability. I mean, let me just first say 5 minutes goes incredibly quickly, and man, did I only do 1/4 of what I was supposed to say. I think, there's this kind of safety in the measurability, or perceived safety in the measurability of more down funnel marketing, right? And in that, it makes it easier for us to believe in what we're about to do. It makes it easier for us to sell. We can see in real time whether we think it's working. Can you sell to a CFO that's geared towards wanting provability of truly creative ideas? No. You need a company with vision. You need an executive with vision. And you need an executive that's not measuring quarter by quarter. I don't think that's many companies right now. But when you look at companies like Nike and others, the Colin Kaepernick bet was a huge bet, right? It was a right bet. It was a right bet based on both the brand history, the right bet based on the culture. But at some point, somebody has said, somebody's going to burn their Nikes or not buy Nikes because they don't agree with the statement. We don't care. And I think, that takes a level of guts and focus that just doesn't exist right now in business. And I think it's ironic because, the average tenure for a CMO is like 2 to 3 years. So what's the worst going to happen? You're going to get laid off or you're going to move on, right? And so why measure, why drive to the bottom? Why don't you just kind of take some big shots and go for it?
And I would add to that and say, if you find yourself in a marketing meeting where the CFO gets to ask questions like that, find a new job. You should report to the CEO if you're the CMO, not the CFO. They don't understand what you're doing. They won't. It's a bridge too far to cross most of the time.
Yep.
With a handful of innovative companies, you can get it, but you don't want to be in that meeting.
I think a super relevant example right now is look what just happened with Kraft. And I'm sorry if there's Kraft marketers in the house. I'm sure you've gone through some pretty terrible stuff over the last little while. But with their 3G investment and their zero-based budgeting, they essentially went on a race to the bottom, cutting costs at every corner until they completely missed out on changing consumer behavior, innovation, the things that used to make their products famous, and they were eclipsed by everyone else. They didn't realize that people's tastes and behaviors were changing. And I think, those are the types of things, cost cutting, profit margins, et cetera, that you can use a computer and say, hey, CFO, I'm going to do this and we're going to get results. And ultimately it might work for a quarter or 2 quarters, but in the long run, you may miss some massive things. And it takes, human beings and insights and guts to really see that stuff that you're going to miss when you're just racing to the bottom.
I think what was really interesting is Andrea had a slide, and this is like, I'm going to be a contrarian and take the conversation way the fuck off track. But it's good, I think, if you're surveying me. So Andrea had this slide, and it said it was equal CX. It was like a formula.
Yeah.
What was that? What was it saying? What was the
So
slide again?
digital is CX plus tech plus data.
Digital CS. Right. So that's cool. When we talk
Yes.
about product in this market, and it's sort of getting, and like it's riffing on what you're saying. When we talk about product, there's a lot of companies you get to, and they talk about product like it's a tech thing. It's like, no, like your product, if you're Domino's, is pizza. And like a great pizza ordering experience, and like a killer pie when it gets to your door, and like something that matches up with whatever cannabis you're consuming. That's the business they're in. That's your product. But we talk about product in like tech and startup and marketing like it's like a pyramid. It's like lives off on its own. It's like, are you fucked? No. Like our products we go to market with when we build something. So like at a pizza company or what was the company you were referencing in your Starbucks? That entire like the ordering experience on the app, that is part of your product. That is your CX. Like that is the holy grail. That is the zeitgeist, the DNA of why you exist. Get that right, whether it's with digital or not, is it. That's all that matters. And your CFO won't get it again.
And probably, well, I'm going to wrap up that idea. I really like that slide about short-term sales versus long-term brand building. And I think I just was reading about Tim Cook, who's done an incredible job at optimizing and growing Apple sales, accumulating cash. But arguably in the last 8 years, there has not been kind of a very clear direction for Apple of what that next frontier is going to be. So arguably those crazy ideas are the ones that are going to define the company maybe 10 years from now, not necessarily for the next quarter, right?
I think, sorry, just one thing on that slide that struck me when Michelle put it up, and this is something that I think about a lot, is we talk about it in very binary terms. It's always this versus this, right? It's like bottom funnel versus top funnel, digital direct versus quote unquote traditional mass. The truth is you need all of it. And if you're not a marketer that's thinking about the entire ecosystem and how those two things interlink and what role they play in your overall mix, then you're not doing your job. And I think, it's easy to pick a battle of one versus the other, but the truth is, and having seen this firsthand, each of them are required to accomplish great things over the long term. You definitely need the short-term pull, but you need to build long-term equity in the company to ensure that that short-term remains intact. Yeah, that's all I have to say on that matter.
So let's shift gears. So Gabe, you were talking about content, or I guess in a broader content marketing topic, which is not necessarily related to publisher, but brands as well. So you were talking about the idea of curation versus creation. Obviously, well, one can argue that curating content is easier than creating your own content. And with more technology, you can find better content quicker. So do you think as more companies adopt that curation mentality will lead to just total commodity of content, where everybody has the exact same news story, everybody has the exact same thing to say, and there's not enough originality? Kind of where do you draw that line with your 1,000 pieces of content?
Fair. So let's qualify first. I don't know if I was talking or ranting. Okay. And then either way, I do agree with you that there's a ton of commoditization right now. And I would also agree with you that net new creation of an idea is far harder than curation. Curation moves much quicker. There's a lot more leads to start with versus sitting in a room with a bunch of really intelligent, great strategists trying to come up with something net new. Net new is bloody hard. And then net new at scale is even more difficult right now. But if you think about what Jay was saying with Nike, Nike's idea is a very well curated thought that was in the public realm already. They figured out how to support it. It was curation. That was a version of curation, and they made it their own, and there was a natural synergy, and but there was an element of curation there. Creating net new is really, really difficult. We've tried net new, Vitaly, and it's so much harder. It's so much harder unless you have a monopoly-based distribution model, and then you can do whatever you want. If you have monopolistic distribution, it doesn't matter. Then you can shove whatever you want in the market.
So like a big publisher that has audience that is there for original content, like New York Times or something?
Yeah, New York Times, or if you have an email subscription base that's like 150,000 strong, you can introduce new ideas at scale very quickly. If you don't, then you're going to have to give birth to that thing every single time you want to try and make something work. It's very hard.
Does anybody else on the panel work in the content space, and how does that relate to what you do?
I've worked in the content space. I agree. I think the big illusion is that, when you're curating content and you see the things that rise to the top, you don't realize the magnitude of the amount of content that is behind all that content. So all the things competing for attention with that content, and what you're seeing is what rises to the top, and it looks easy to produce, and you think it's replicable, right? It's like, it's not. That person could have missed simply by choosing one wrong word or by one wrong image. And I don't think we give a lot of thought to that, right? We just simply say, well, just create that. You know, you often get that. It's like, make it viral, produce something that's going to get 1 million likes, without any consideration of why you want those likes or whatever. But that aside, the ability to create it, it takes a bit of dumb luck and a lot of human understanding. And I think, we've lopped off the humanity from our business and deferred simply to looking at data sets to help us make those decisions. And what happens time and time again is you're chasing the past, per Andrea's point earlier. You're looking at what happened in the past. You're hoping that predicts the future. It doesn't, because what people are looking for is net new. And it becomes increasingly difficult because net new's happening every millisecond, basically, by 1 million trillion other competitors.
So if you take some of I can riff on this and then we can keep going and explore other stuff, but you think about net new ideas. I showed you 10 of the most popular social stories on Valentine's Day. It was one day in a point of time. Does anyone know how many stories the New York Times publishes per day and how many writers or content creators they use to do it? Any guesses? 18,000 creators, 240 or 250 pieces of content a day. The New York Post is around 500 mark every day, so they produce about 500 with less staff, but 500 net new pieces of content a day. Those are storylines coming out every day. Only 10 rose to the top, per Jay's point. It's really, really difficult to have that net new idea take. And I know content marketing is different than brand marketing and agency work, but there are similarities. There are definitely similarities.
Yeah, I think we're in a weird world, too, where the rules are changing every day. I mean, the most popular social post of all time is an egg. Right, that was the biggest flex of my teenage daughters in the history of flexing. They're very proud to have gotten in the early thousands. But, I think that says something. That says that the community out there doesn't want to be told what the most popular content is. I think they're like, yeah, let me show you an egg. And let me show you what that egg can do. And what is it? I don't even know what it is at. I've stopped checking. 30 million or something.
Oh, it's gone full beast mode.
Is it
yeah.
like 100 million
It's
now,
insane.
and I'm just really old and out of touch? Yeah.
Broke the page.
Yeah, so I think I think we need to be really mindful of looking at that kind of thing and layering that onto the way we approach what we do every day. The egg theory.
It's bigger than the internet. It is the internet now. So a question before I open up for the audience to ask our great panelists. What is your opinion about the if you had the crystal ball, what do you think is going to happen in the next 2 years? How will the topic that we just talked about change, except we're just going to have more technology everywhere? Is that true?
I think 5G is going to have a massive impact on everything we're talking about. I was very careful to say in the next couple of years, I don't think technology is going to be sort of the lead horse, but I do think the speed at which we'll be able to process data is going to change customer expectations. I mean, I think the kinds of immersive experiences that people are going to expect and be able to get from brands are going to be different. I think the rate at which people are going to expect, instant real-time personalization is going to change. I don't know what that looks like yet, but I do think that, if we do this talk in 3-4 years, it's going to be a lot different just because of the sheer, power that 5G is going to put in our hands.
How do you think that's going to affect your work with your clients? What do you think you will have to be telling them?
I mean, I think the biggest danger right now is that, and I'm guilty of it today, is we look at things like voice and VR and AR, and we go, that's kind of a gimmick. But in a few years, it's not going to be a gimmick anymore because it's going to be so easy to do and so mainstream. And so I think the marketers that are thinking about emerging technologies are going to be the ones who are going to be out ahead when those things are able to be much more mainstream.
I think there's something there for sure. I mean, we're constantly thinking when the bar is going up on creativity and the idea, first of all, who's going to pay for it? That's the second question. It's very expensive stuff to be developing, but it will become standard practice. And then just building on that idea, I think in 2 years, the creators will be unleashed. The creators have been caged. If you look at the suppression of new ideas and voices and that, who put up the campaign with the kind bar? Was that Alex? yeah, that's a great example of like, bursting your idea bubble, your comfort zone. That's going to happen. There is an element of active suppression of new ideas out there. The creators in the space, influencers in particular, and just artists are having a hard time getting distribution, but they're not stopping their creative process. They're still continuing, just kind of in the dark or on their own with very limited distribution right now. Digital platforms are hard to break through on, and even though Twitter does have an influencer core that it works with, there's still hundreds of thousands of other really wonderful creators that run blogs that have barely any readers on them right now. They want distribution. And back to that one slide that I had with, everything's getting bigger, it's easier to gain distribution. So I think unleash the creators, give people what they want, challenge new ideas. It's kind of bubbling. And you may not see it if you're not on the content side, but influencers and content creators have been actively suppressed in the last 24 months.
Such a gentleman. I think we're going to see the rise of owned channel. I think people have been investing, due respect to media, people in the room, I think people have been investing too much in other people's babies, and I think marketers are going to start realizing there's value in creating their own value. So my prediction is that's what we'll be talking about in 6 months. I'm calling 6 months.
I like it.
I'll throw on mine then, I guess. The first thing I think is we're going to move away from data as a manipulator to data as a service for consumers. I think we've been using it or trying to use it to our advantage and creating value out of data records as opposed to pushing that data back to consumers to give them a sense of power over their own worlds, which I think is infinitely more valuable to us as marketers and to the consumer as well. I think the second is going to be increased automation, the bottom of funnel marketing, to the point of near lack of need for human intervention. And I think the third would be an increase in video as a form of communication on the web. I know you're seeing it. Netflix is already doing it. But as I look through the scrolling Twitter feed, it's still a very kind of flat experience dictated by data rates and accessibility. I think 5G opens up new opportunities. I think incoming technology will open up new opportunities, but I think we move to almost a full video-based internet.
Okay, awesome, thank you. Okay, we have time for a couple questions, so let's do it. All right.
Don't give Matt the mic.
I promise I'll be nice. Come on.
Oh, your mic's not on. That's weird.
Can everyone hear me? No, I'll be nice. I'll be nice. If you could go back, I mean, I know you're all very young and barely out of your 20s. Good start, right? Yeah. If you could go back and give your 20-year-old self some advice, in professional advice, what would it be?
You work with him.
Yeah, I guess technically he's my boss, so I have to answer this. I would say, like, don't chase this shiny object. I think I spent a lot of time in my 20s thinking, like, do I want to specialize in this or that? And, there's a room in the world for specialists, but I think personally, like, when you understand holistically what's going on in the world and what's influencing consumers, you can be a much stronger marketer, and you can really have an understanding of the consumer journey and be able to produce really useful, impactful things. And I think I spent a lot of time trying to figure out if I wanted to focus on one thing. And, when I opened up my worldview and thought about things sort of end to end, it definitely changed what I could do.
I would add to that and say maybe, it's a great question, Matt. I would say it matters immensely who you work with and who you spend time with in the workplace. People who understand you, who are empathetic, compassionate, and willing to teach are really high value in your 20s. Like, probably the most valuable people. They will challenge you and they'll make you better. And then the second thing would be slow down and put in the hard work to ask the questions that make you uncomfortable, and don't be afraid to be vulnerable with senior people or even peers who know more than you, because that is where you make up all the ground of just being like an average person to actually understanding a business, being deeply ingrained in the operations of how it works, and actually learning something, like a tangible skill.
I would say find your voice fast. And something that, I think not until probably my mid-30s that I found my voice. So I'm just about outside of 20, Matt's right. But find your voice fast. I think, when I was young, I tried to do what other people expected me to do, and it wasn't until I started doing what I believed was right that I started to succeed.
I still don't have a really good answer to this question. I think honesty is important. I think candor in this business is rare. I think bravery in believing, I grew up on the digital data side, and, as a woman 10 plus years ago, wasn't, you didn't see so many in the roles like I'm in today. So I think find a good boss who believes in you, and speak your mind, be fair, be motivated by people around you, and doing the right thing for your team. That's the best advice I could give.
Goosebumps. Anybody? It's really good. Okay, we had another hand there at the back.
So we've talked a lot tonight about net new, but what about the role of fundamentals in an iteration, particularly when it comes to data? House of Cards was iterated. Netflix bet the bank on House of Cards based on the UK series. Star is Born last night. Third time for that movie. Star turn for not only the movie, but the actresses in the movie every time. What about the role of fundamentals in source material?
I had a glass of wine before, too, with Andrea. Give me the question again. We'll figure it out.
How does source material function, right, as we look at, the overwhelming data we get?
I mean, I think a problem that we run into with a lot of clients, and I have no idea if this actually answers your question or not, but they come to us and they want to do like digital transformation, and then you look and you're like, you literally have nothing. Like, we are building from scratch, and the time it's going to take you to even catch up versus transform is so immense. And so I would say, like, everybody wants to leapfrog, but if you're forgetting about those important things, like having a foundation in place to even be able to make use of or collect data in the first place, you're really far behind. So, and I think it sets a lot of people up to fail when they get this like notion of transformation in their head and they want to leapfrog and they don't care about the fundamental stuff. That's when it often fails, because you don't have a team in place, you don't have a process in place, and you can't keep that up after sort of the initial vision is in place. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think the fundamentals are important, and I think if they're not there, you set yourself up to fail from the start.
But with that said, I think the example of House of Cards, they took a bet initially based on no data, right? And that was the promise of Netflix for a lot of content producers was, I don't have to put myself through the research process, which typically kills, 99 out of 100 shows. That I could create what I want to create. Nobody's going to interfere. Nobody's going to be looking for the data to prove that this is going to work, and they're going to pay me. And then once the show airs and they see the traction, then they start iterating off of it. But I would argue that, that iteration and the interest in House of Cards, the show maintains a stasis, right? It's not like it picks up in interest. They have a hard time keeping that interest going because people are constantly looking for new. And so the maintenance and the leveraging of data is important to keep that asset going, but it's not driving net new audience insofar as the storyline is concerned relative to the data that input into that storyline.
I actually think we have a problem of polar opposites. I think we're obsessed with the new and the real-time data, or we're obsessed with the history. And I actually think that if you're not thinking of all of it, you're in big trouble. We were talking earlier today about, I was arguing with a woman about the virtues of data, because that's what I do in my spare time. And she was talking about the fact that she owns a Porsche, a beat-up old shitty pickup truck, and then I think she said like a beat up old Ford Focus or something that she drives. She lives in New York. That she drives around and she doesn't care that it gets smashed up and bumped into when she parks. And the algorithm would have a really hard time finding the woman who does all those things. And the way she would buy and want to be in sort of the latest and greatest sports car that, you know, makes great noise and feels really good, you know, when she's slipping it between gears versus the bumping along a country road in Kentucky or whatever in her pickup truck. So I think the problem is not putting all our chips into one, whatever the poker reference would be to complete the sentence, but it's like, it's making sure that that we're broad and accepting that there's lots of things to look at today.
And then, like, you think about data, you think about that woman and the algorithms and what Jay's saying as well, and the fundamentals question. Really interesting question. When we get to the core of it, it's like, well, we're actually surrounded by data, but data is like kind of useless unless you know what you want to do, first of all. So like when you wake up in the morning, there's data, there's the temperature. It tells you whether to put shorts on and stand in the wind today or not, right? Like that is the first piece of data. But if there's not an intention there or like something you're trying to do, what's the point? Like, don't even look at the thermometer if you don't need it. Same thing when you drive your car. Most primitive piece of data technology in the world is the speedometer. But you wouldn't use it to govern your GPS. Like, that's not where you're going. It's at the rate of speed you're traveling. So if we don't have fundamentals in place, which would kind of be like, what are we trying to do with our user, our fan, our customer, our competitor's customer, Domino's, you know, competes with Pizza or whomever, then there's no point. You have to have the fundamentals.
I think it's a difference between customer centricity and data centricity. And just because you have leaps of data doesn't mean you've got the customer thing on lock at all.
Yep.
Okay, I think we have 2 more minutes, and then this is the last question.
Awesome, guys. First, I don't know, is this working?
Yeah.
Working.
Okay, awesome.
No, it's not. Joking.
My name is Shaw. Thank you so much for your time. My friend here with the nice watch actually asked my question, but I wanted to follow up about the similar question. As a young student entrepreneur studying marketing, I'm finishing up my final year, and I just want to continue to keep learning and be on top of these new technologies that are going around. So if you guys were in my position, how would you stay on top of these new trends, these new technologies, and what would you do in my position? And another follow-up question is just why the companies you guys chose to work at the current moment. Thank you.
Tricky.
Matt, are you
I need
working with
more
Matt?
wine.
Do you guys work together? Thank you.
Those are really big questions. I mean, I think you have to participate. That's what I say to every student who's ever talked to me. If you aren't living and breathing the things that you want to know about, you're never going to know them, you know, authentically or deeply enough to be able to, you know, properly make use of them. I didn't talk a lot about Huge in my presentation, so I feel like I have a minute to at least say I chose Huge because I worked in really traditional marketing agencies for a really long time, advertising agencies, and I was sick of having a really limited toolkit to solve problems for real people in the world. And what I love about Huge is we are all about user centricity. What is it that people actually want and need in their life? And it doesn't matter if it's a TV ad or a brand new store concept, we'll find a way to solve it. And that was the really big differentiator for me. And I wanted to be able to put my strategic thinking to use in actually solving problems and not kind of solving problems.
I would say from a new tech perspective, the best advice I can give you is to understand the why rather than the what. I think a lot of people obsess with the what and the technical abilities of particular platforms, but if you understand why people are using them and what's attracting them to those platforms, then you can anticipate what's next, right? And you can anticipate where people are going, and you can leverage those platforms to their full potential. I've seen it time and time again where people get stuck obsessing about, well, what can you do on Facebook? Well, who cares? Why are people using Facebook? And how do you leverage that to move people? Because that's your job, right? Your job is to affect behavior change. So if you don't understand why people are using that platform, everything else is irrelevant. The other thing is it'll allow you to stay out in front of all the new technology, because as Andrea pointed out, it changed between when she was sitting in the chair to when she got on stage. You're going to drive yourself crazy trying to stay on top of everything. So if you have a perspective on why things are happening and what it means from a human perspective, right, you can understand then what will come in the future. I think that's part one. What attracted me to my company, I don't know. I'm an ad guy through and through. I tried client side. I suck at it because I just like to focus on a million problems. I have ADD, and you give me one problem and I'll claw my eyes out. I need like a million challenges. So I've always been attracted to advertising because I've been exposed to a million different businesses and people and ways of thinking, and I think that's just kept me going. The other thing is I think there's a huge opportunity in marketing, and I didn't talk much about this, but a huge opportunity, and I saw this in the Colin Kaepernick piece as well, is that we have a lot of power in marketing and advertising to affect worldview and to affect culture. And I don't think enough marketers take that responsibility seriously. So everything I've done in my career, I've really focused on doing what's best for society, in as much as I can within that brand, to affect that positive change. And that's why I do what I do, because I have the power and a limited ability to affect that power in my role. But it's funny, I mean, like you look at the things I'm known for, I didn't use research or data for any of it. And the things that I'm not known for, I use research and data for. So I don't know if that just means I'm shit with data. Maybe that's why I'm not
and you know what, and I'm going to say, because I'm going to try to wrap it, I'm going to say to the student, so here's my advice to you. Travel a shitload, go find a great person to work for and learn and work your ass off and learn and ask why. And you know what, whether it's in advertising or in MarTech or in tech, it's all the same thing. Head down, grit, hard work, a bit of luck, and a great mentor. Okay, so what an incredible panel. Wow, you guys were awesome. Really awesome.